Hey, David, thank you so much. As David mentioned, I met some of you at Gain Europe last year, and it was a wonderful experience to come across and spend some time with my European colleagues. It'd be lovely to be there in Bern or somewhere in person, but I'm joining you from Sydney, and it's just as wonderful to be with you because I always really appreciate the opportunity to connect with Adventist communicators around the world. Now, our context down under is a little different. We're very blessed in some ways, and they've asked me to share a little bit about that context today. And so I hope it's helpful. Not all of it may be helpful, but take what you can, hopefully, and apply it to your context. I'll just see if this works. It's always hazardous sharing your screen in Zoom. We're familiar with the muting. Are you on mute has entered our languages in the last few years very, very commonly. Before that, we wouldn't have said that phrase very often to each other. So I've been the editor of Adventist Records since 2016. Before that, David mentioned I graduated from Avondale. I also have done my master's in creative writing. So I have an interest in creative writing. I've always enjoyed narrative feature writing, which is where you take a story and you expand it. So it can be a crossover between real life, between news, and between more creative ways of telling the story. But my background, I've worked for the church since I graduated from Avondale College, now university, which is our South Pacific Division Adventist institution here, our Adventist University in Australia. And I've worked at Adventist Record ever since. So I've done every job there. I did the advertisements and the notices in the back, the obituaries section, the weddings and obituaries that we have there. I've done the small news snippets, been the news editor and the letters and the features pages. And now I'm the overall editor of the magazine. And it's been a real joy. And I believe God calls different people to different things. And for this part of my life, he's definitely called me to, I guess, media communications, writing, to share him in that space and in that way. As David mentioned, the South Pacific has our Adventist Record, and we're going to use that as a case study today to understand news and why news is important in the church. People may ask you, why does the church do news? The church should be about the good news, right? We should just focus on sharing the gospel. We shouldn't spend time, money, resources on news. It seems like a very maybe corporate or very secular pursuit. Why does the church do news? So we're going to attempt to answer some of those questions today. To do that, I'm going to give you a little bit of background and a little bit of the story of Adventist Record. What is Adventist Record and how does it work? What function does it serve in the South Pacific Division? So here are some of the vital statistics we have at present. This has dropped since COVID somewhat, but we have 17,000 printed copies going out through Australia and New Zealand. So Record is received to all the churches that want it, that need it, for free to all the churches in in Australia and New Zealand. Now in the Pacific, our Pacific Island fields, because we are a division institution, we have Fiji, Samoa, Papua New Guinea, Kiribati, Vanuatu, Niue, Tuvalu, some places, countries, perhaps you've never even heard of in Europe there. And so there are 8,000 copies on top of the 17,000 that go through our Pacific Island fields. We have grown our website to about 750,000 users or visitors through the year. Now, some of those statistics, if you know anything about web presence, are a little bit inflated. Many of those are one-time visitors. So we do have some stories that are sort of SEO'd to attract people. We have one column called The 10, where we do 10 encouraging Bible verses for men, something like that, or 10 times someone was raised from the dead in the Bible. And people Google those terms, like who was raised from the dead in the Bible, and they find this list. It's an article and a list. It's called a listicle, we say in English. So we've got this opportunity to reach a broad range of people with content like that on our website. We have 600,000 members through the Pacific. So that's something to remember. We have many more members than we're actually producing copies, than we're actually able to distribute our content. And yet some of those members are in remote, far-flung places like the highlands of Papua New Guinea. Papua New Guinea has 800 languages. So you can understand some of the challenges of communicating in a place as remote as Papua New Guinea. Last year, we celebrated 125 years. So this was a big program. In fact, the day before I flew out to go to Gain Europe in Montenegro, I was part of hosting and planning and preparing this Sabbath where we celebrated 125 years of Adventist Record. So this gives you a perspective of our team, some of the team members. Dr. Brad Kemp and Pastor Glenn Townend are the CEO of Adventist Media and the president of our South Pacific Division. Myself, you'll see, just to, I guess, the left of the cake or the right, maybe if you're flipped around. Now, only two of those girls, the two girls next to me, actually work on record part-time. And Tracy works as our copy editor, and Jesse, my other colleague on the far right, my right, I suppose, is he's my associate editor for Signs of the Times. So this is representing people from both of the teams that we have. And so we don't have a lot of people to do all the things that we do, but it is an important function of Adventist Record to provide news. According to the division, and we're very blessed to have the division's funding and support to be able to provide these magazines for free to our churches. These are some of the purposes of Adventist Record: to educate and to inform our church members, to equip and nurture them, to build our community, and to inspire. My favorite is the inspire one, and I'll share a little bit more about that later on. Some of the functions of news in the magazine. So we're talking primarily about news today. Some of those functions, you would think it's to educate and to inform. Okay, we let church members know what's going on. But it's interesting how I've witnessed news throughout the years fill some of those other functions to build the community around the world of Adventists, to inspire people to action. It's a strange thing, perhaps, to think when you come at it initially, understanding church communications, but it actually does help to inspire church members through news pieces. This verse in 2 Kings, I quite like this story. It's a strange story about a besieged city, and there are lepers in the city, and they discover that the enemy has been pushed back by God. And they go out of the gate and they find there's food, there's abundance. And they say to each other, what are we doing This is not right. This is a day of good news, and we are keeping it to ourselves. So let's not keep the good news in the church to ourselves. Record magazine has not always been free. So I'll tell you a little bit about this history. So we began in 1898, and it was good to celebrate our event, our anniversary last year, because it gave us the opportunity to reflect and to understand where we'd come from. Back in the day, and you can see there the very first edition of Adventist Record. It was called the Union Conference Record, and the first issue that was published in 1898. It had a very report-based feel. It was like letters from home. This is how many tracts the colporteurs or the literature evangelists have delivered. This is who brother so-and-so has reached out in the Solomon Islands, etc. But as it grew, it began to contain more and more mission stories. There was a hunger for those at home in Australia and in New Zealand for what is happening in our places where we are serving in the mission field. Now, the division, obviously, perhaps in your part of the world as well, the division hasn't always been shaped in that way. The Union Conference hasn't always encompassed the countries that it has now. These regions are shifting and changing. So the Australasian Union was where the record started, and that didn't always encompass the mission fields because they didn't exist. There was no Adventist church there. And as the church grew and expanded and reached into some of those areas, the division was formed eventually. I think as early as late as the 1980s or 70s, the South Pacific Division was actually formed. But across the years, record started to change. Some of you may be familiar with Robert Parr was the editor for some time, and he really changed the tempo, the style of the magazine. And then we had the Ford crisis. Desmond Ford sort of rattled the church, especially in our part of the world, especially in the South Pacific Division. Many people left the ministry. Many members were struggling with which way is right, which version of theology is correct, and I won't get into that detail. There's plenty already out there about it, but basically it led to a new editor being appointed. His name was James Coffin, and he was from the United States. He had background at Adventist Review, and he brought in a more journalistic style. So the news in Record really changed from being very unedited, very loose, if you will, to very hard news style, proper journalistic, professional style. He also, another thing that was significant was he introduced a letters page. Now, there had been letters before, but the letters were like, I'm traveling in Fiji. I had these experiences. Praise God for my faith and the faith of the people I'm serving. This is a wonderful thing. Whereas for the first time, the letters started to include things that perhaps might have been critical of the church, or some questions around how we act and how we behave, and then responses. It started a conversation. So Record became a place for the church to, yes, it's still an official paper, but there is more of a conversation sense rather than a this is what you shall believe sort of sense. And so that was a really significant milestone, I guess, in the journey of Record. And we still have the news, the journalism, the professional style in our news pages, and we still have the letters section in our pages, and we still have conversation. People write in responding to things that happen, and then people respond to those people, and there's an ongoing conversation that happens in our magazine. So In 2009, we moved from our publishing house for the editorial functions of Adventist Record to our division office, right across the car park from our division office. So those are some of the significant things, but why share news? Now, you've probably got some perspectives or ideas. If you work in communication, there's probably some background for you to understand some of these things, but here's some ideas. The heart of the three angels' messages is the everlasting good news. So we have good news. We are encouraged to share good news. Why is it that we think that news as a communication model doesn't include actually sharing news? It is a good way to share that model. The way I've always looked at it, and the theme for my my sermon at the 125-year anniversary was what God has done. So in the stories of news of what the church is doing, we can actually see what God is doing in the South Pacific Division. So let's highlight what God is doing in our church and through our church members. Finally, news is a non-threatening way to share the positives about our church. The coverage is credible. It's easy to access for those outside your community. If one of your churches is running a soup kitchen, cost of living crisis, I'm sure that there's pressures in Europe as there are in Australia at the moment with how food shortages, money going around is a bit tight. It's a struggle for some people. And so our churches, our ADRA organization is out there doing wonderful work, and people respond to that. It's something that people in the community can appreciate. It's positive about our church. And so we need to be sharing those stories as widely as we possibly can. So where can we share the news? Well, there are internal sources of news. So the Adventist Record, local missions and churches have their own bulletins and newsletters. There are external sources of news, national and regional newspapers, radio, television, social media. And then there are the outward-facing internal sources of news, places like Hope Channel, places like Signs of the Times magazine. Now, these are all very distinct, and the way you do things in these platforms is going to be different. But your external news is a real opportunity. If you're a journalist and you're producing news for the church, even if you're not a journalist, if you're in an office of a mission or a union somewhere and you're finding good news coming across your desk about what the church is doing, it's important to cultivate relationships. And especially with our country, our country or our regional churches, there are opportunities for our pastors to have, say, columns in local newspapers that aren't available in our bigger cities. So it depends on your context, but there are opportunities for us to impact the local communities that we live in with news. And news, as I said, is the straightforward way to share what the church is doing. So here are some of the benefits, as I see it, of sharing news as a church. News is a credible source of information. Now, we are in a time of information wars, of fake news. We know that there are people trusting alternative news from social media and places like that, but news still has a certain authoritative style, especially if you're writing in a hard news style. And we'll get into the difference between different styles down the track. News is succinct. In other words, it can be quite short. And you might think it's not that helpful to share short news. Well, I beg to differ. We have a section called Flashpoint, and in it, we share stories that are about 50 words long. They are to the point. You can only fit 1, 2, or 3 sentences into these little news snippets. And I remember a long time ago, I was working on the Flashpoint section and I saw news come in from one of our African divisions. And it shared that there had been a large baptism of people in a place. And for me, the news angle, the unique thing about this story, the strange thing about this story was the story mentioned that the baptism had taken place in a crocodile infested river. Okay. So, not a nice baptismal font, not a swimming pool, not a beach. I don't know how you do baptisms in Europe, if you have fonts in all your churches or you have to find other ways to baptize people. But in Africa, in Papua New Guinea, in Fiji, and places like this, we're baptizing people in the river. And it stood out to me, so I included it in our news because we have a few little snippets, not many, but a few from around the world. This is part of the news building community function. And so we have a few snippets from around the world to see what is the church doing in a broader sense. This builds our sense of identity as Seventh-day Adventists. It helps us see what other people are doing in the world. And so I included this little story and I didn't think much of it. Some years later, I was at a camp meeting and a woman came up to me and she said, "Oh, I have to share with you my testimony, my story. I was attending an Adventist church for many years. I was attending a Baptist church and then an Adventist church. I was searching for the truth, and my family invited me to the Adventist church, and I was attending there for a long time. And one day the pastor said to me, 'Sharon, why don't you get baptized?' And I said, Pastor, I'm waiting for that aha moment. I just haven't felt, I don't know. I just want it to be special, but nothing's happened yet. I don't know." And he said, "Well, you should think about it." And she went away from that conversation. She was thinking about that conversation and she started reading Record and she read a little snippet of news in Record about some people in Africa being baptized in a crocodile infested river. And she said it was like a light went on. Bang, the Holy Spirit said to her, "Sharon, if these people are getting baptized in a crocodile infested river, what's stopping you? What's blocking you?" And she took the plunge. She made the decision and she was a baptized Seventh-day Adventist church member. So to me, it just brings a smile to my face every time I think of her story, because this little throwaway snippet of news, this news from the other side of the world, it was short, it was succinct, it was seemingly unimportant, and yet it made a decision for a lady. It helped her make a decision with eternal consequences. And I think that's a really important function, a simple function of news that news can fulfill. News is versatile. We can do news in different ways and in different styles, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go. Bad news can still be good. What do I mean by that? Sometimes in the church, there's a hesitancy, a fear to share news that isn't fully positive. But it is an important function of our office, of our communication departments, of our to manage and to help spread bad news. If there is bad news, we have to share it. One, it helps us be more credible. We are not just a propaganda PR machine, but also the Bible is full of challenging and difficult stories that show human nature. And I think sometimes bad news is necessary to be shared with people to give them a full perspective of what's happening, perhaps to manage the news or to tell that side of the story, we can't pretend anything is unbiased. As journalists, as news writers, we want to be unbiased as we possibly can, but every story has bias. And there are lots of independent Adventist news media that are happy to tell the bad stories. But if we remain silent when there's bad things happening, we risk we risk losing the narrative. We don't have control. We don't have our side of the story told. And so there is a place for where bad news can actually become good news in terms of how people trust the church. If the church is rosy and everything's perfect all the time, people know that doesn't reflect real life. And so if we're never sharing any of the bad news, and we can share that news with the appropriate official statements and the appropriate people quoted, it gives some credibility and some authority to that news. The news is instant, and this is what we are wrestling with in this day and age, that people can find out about bad news, I mean any news, before the end of the day. It used to be that missionaries would send a letter. It would take 3 or 4 weeks to arrive. It would take a couple of weeks to print. And the news that you were reading about in the magazine was maybe up to 3 months old. My wife took a photo of me setting up my session here this morning, and she's already put it on her Instagram page. So it's out there. People know I'm speaking to you in Europe. It happens instantly these days, and so that's something we must consider. And news can impart vision and mission and direction to the members. It can help members know what are the initiatives that the church is taking and why are they important, and perhaps why we should be on board with some of these initiatives as church members. Got to keep rolling here. Are we okay? How are we tracking? Are we following? Can you understand my Australian accent?
Yes, not a problem.
Very good.
About another 10 minutes, Jared, and then we'll take some questions, yeah?
Perfect. So I won't spend too much time on this, but for those that are less familiar with how to write news, we're looking at things that make a good news story. Is it new? Is it big? Is it timely? Is it important? Is it unique or different? And does it have a human interest angle? I look at all those things. Those are common journalism 101 informations. They're out there. What about in the church? I look for also news that is innovative or inspiring. Can I start a ministry? Is someone doing something different in an area that other people may not have considered? I'll skip some of that. So one thing that's important, and this is actually, I'll move to, this is a challenge for us. So let's talk about the structure of our, how it works. We have 2 or 3 people. We have one main news editor. She's in charge of much of the gathering and curating and spreading of news for our office. Now, one person reporting on news from all 600,000 members of our division, it's a big job. It's an impossible job. And so most of our church offices, and perhaps you find yourself in this situation, you're too small to support a news organization. That's why we work together. The beauty of the church is we have branches, local churches, local offices, conferences and missions, district offices all through the world. So your conference and your mission, I don't know if you have missions there, but we use these offices to support building up that news network. The union and the division level, we can collate and spread that information. And we can use content from a global church. So we don't have to just rely on our own backyard. People are interested in what's happening at the Silver Springs meetings, at the General Conference every year. People are interested in what's happening in Europe. If there's an innovative ministry in Europe, we want to know about that in Australia, because it may be that our cultural context can fit something like that in it. And so we can share some of those stories. And so the only way this is possible for us, without having a journalist in every conference or mission or place, is to use the communication people that are appointed there, to use even local church members to be empowered and equipped to submit news to us that we can then share. So that's a really important function. And it goes to our essential elements of submission. We ask for photos, we ask for the details and their contact details. That means we can reconnect and get information from them if we need to follow up. So those things are really important. I can send you this presentation, and so the things that I'm skipping, you can have a quick look. I'll quickly comment on this one, the types of news. Obviously, there's a very standard type of news, but consider we have an interview show once a week, which is sometimes news-based, but very much what's happening in the church. How do we live our faith well? That's become a podcast and a live stream on some of our social media platforms. That's another way of telling stories. The short headlines we've already talked about, and some of the promotion pieces can become newsy. If you make them newsy, they're much more interesting than, hey, we have an event coming up, you should be there. We find a news angle and we share that ahead of time so people are aware of what's happening in the church. So where to next? We have to future-proof ourselves. Print is not going to be around for long. Perhaps. I'm still skeptical that it will completely die out, but we've got the different social media channels. We've got the podcast, where we have to look at ways to get news to church members in a different style and a different place. And the division this year is actually, we're having a review of Record and its functions and how that works. And so we have to justify or present on why this works. Why is it important for the church? These are some of the numbers that we have. So you shared I shared the magazine statistics. You can see here some of the followings we have on the different platforms that we're involved in. And it is a lot of work to be on all the different platforms. And so you just prioritize the main one and you just let others tick along, but you have to be in those spaces. So I'll just share as we finish a couple of quick impact stories. On the left, 2002, we did a story on the Little Blue Shed, a ministry that a lady started in Uganda in Africa. Now, she's an Australian lady. She just became an Adventist traveling to Africa. She was a corporate person and she saw the need, and through a series of events, she became an Adventist. We did this interview and we put her on the cover. Now, we recently interviewed her just last week, and she shared with us that from that opportunity, from sharing that, she found a couple of major donors, supporters for her ministry. In the last year or year and a half since 2022, they've had 110 baptisms at their church, which is attached to that ministry. And these people are becoming Adventists in Uganda because of this little piece that we ran in Adventist Record. So it's having a worldwide impact. On the right, we have an interview which we've put on YouTube. You can go have a look. This was done for our offering video. But Evelyn is an elder at the Inverell Church. Now, this is in the middle of New South Wales. It's about 5-6 hours drive from where I live, a long way from the nearest sort of international airport. And they found their church was struggling to connect with their community. They were asking, what does the Holy Spirit want us to do? What can we do to make a difference in our little town? And she read a story in Record about a God's Closet ministry. Now, that had started on the Central Coast, but it was based on an American idea. So someone had picked up from America and someone was doing it in New South Wales. And when Evelyn read that story, the lights went on. She started this ministry, and I had the privilege of traveling out there to see what they were doing, and they were making a real impact in the community. Every month, they allow people to come in and take clothes that have been donated. So you can see some of the clothes on the table behind her. They have soft toys for children who don't have maybe toys at home. They have disadvantaged people coming through their gates. And she said, the church has been revived. The community has been revived. This whole ministry has been an amazing benefit to us. And it only started because we read a little report in Record about this God's Closet ministry 5 or 6 hours drive away. And we said, we can do that in our own church too. We can do that here too. So I want to encourage you that news and sharing of news and having publications, even if it's an e-newsletter or a official Facebook feed or an Instagram feed, these are places where news can make an impact for our church members. So we've whizzed through there, but David, I'm happy to take questions. I hope that was helpful to you all. And yeah, we encourage you from Australia. In Europe, I know it's hard to, some of your officers have constraints in terms of staff and time to share news, but I just want to encourage you and bless you, and feel free to translate. I know many of our stories are being translated in Adventist magazine, which is in, I think it's based there in Switzerland. The French translation is going strong, and we've got a lot of articles coming into that publication. And we really appreciate collaborating with you from down under. So yeah, thank you for having me today.
Thank you. You just reminded me of an article I picked up from Record back in 2022 in the autumn, and it was the challenge of generational Adventism. And I've actually got it ready to reproduce in the March edition of TD News, because it was so pertinent to one of the issues that we face about what does it mean to be a generational Adventist, and the author has something very profound to say. So to have access to Record, and by the way, you might as well just mention about the archives and how we can get at them. Let's go there. Yeah.
So on our website, if you want to take this down, I think I forgot it on my slides. It's record.adventistchurch.com, I think. I got to check now.
That's all right.
If you type in record.adventistchurch, it'll come up. That's why I never, .com. So record.adventistchurch.com is our website. On the right-hand side there, you'll see there's the latest issue, and under that, there's the archives. So the GC has our PDF archive for the past 125 years. They continue to put those there, but probably in the last 10 years or something more recent or relevant, if you search it, most of the content has been up on our website. So you'll be able to search in terms, if there's an article you want on a specific topic, if you search it in our website, chances are you'll find something on that topic.
Thank you. So there's a question coming in. When you spoke about professional editing, what did you mean? Does that mean,
yes,
you can only edit if you have a certificate, or is experience possible?
Not at all. Not at all. I guess what I meant by that was it had a very much letters from home feel, and people who submitted would not like to be edited. There was a cultural shift that had to change. So we have here conference newsletters that sometimes go out on weeks that Adventist Record isn't going out. And, you might have more color, I like to say, in that piece. I use the example of Auntie May and her lasagna. There was a church event. Auntie May brought lasagna to the potluck afterwards, the combined lunch. Nobody knows who Auntie May is on the other side of the country, but someone who's local to that area, that adds color and interest to the piece. So we would cut that out. We would make it very much, we receive a lot of pieces, it was a wonderful and blessed sunny day in Sydney when the people gathered together for a event or something like that. Or the piece will start 15 years ago. Elder Bob had a dream, you know, and it's not a new style of writing. So when I say a professional journalistic style, what I mean is you can be a complete amateur, but if you're mimicking the conventions of news, that's what happened at that time. It was turned into, on the 15th of October, such and such happened. Bang, 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 like facts, proper news writing style. Does that make sense? So it turned from letters from the members to being actual news, and that takes editing work. That takes someone to actually convert it. I shouldn't say this, I'm undermining myself, but ChatGPT can do that for you. If you receive something, you know, there's programs out there now that can turn a very flowery puff piece that someone's written their reflections on a day, and you can say, turn this into a hard news style for me, and it will do some of the work for you. So there's cheats, I guess. There's shortcuts these days.
About the letters page, I'm
Yes.
fascinated, and you've got a very special experience with the record, because, as you say, people write in, and there is a conversation going on in the South Pacific Division through the record that's been going on for years. And you know, there is the letters page to me at times seems incredibly honest and open and transparent. You know, every complaint about theology, if a pastor preaches strange theology, there's a brother concerned who will say, I didn't like what I saw, or something like that. So obviously you create community. Have you ever thought yet of doing an online conversation channel with Record Online?
Well, I mean, that's the function of social media, and the website now has comments, so people can have those conversations in the comments. What we're finding is, culturally, it's a bit different. Younger generations aren't quite as engaged and involved in the issues of the church. So many of the letters I receive are still handwritten or typed, right?
Yeah.
So there is the opportunity to have comments, and we open that on all of our platforms. And our moderation is fairly mild. People can still say negative things. It's sort of like the letters page expanded. We don't take down comments if they disagree with us. We take down comments if they're offensive, or they use bad language, or they're personal attacks. You know, we have some standards. We have a policy of appropriate commentary, but we do leave that open because the conversation is moving online more and more. I think it's a really important space to have people have that, because I don't know if you've met many Australians, but they're fairly, how do I?
I couldn't possibly comment.
We Europeans are famous around the world for being blunt sometimes, and Australians are less blunt, but we very much value an honest and open conversation. And we know when people are being inauthentic. And so to pretend there's no disagreements or no difficulties in the church, I think would really harm our credibility. Let's put it that way.
And on which platform is most of your conversation taking place?
Probably still the print magazine, strangely enough.
Okay, yeah, fair enough.
Letters and emails. Some people are accessing the print magazine because we have a weekly email, and you're welcome to join that to just get the highlights each week. If you don't get the print magazine, it will send you the highlights. It'll send you a PDF copy. You can click through the link to get a PDF copy of the magazine, and it can just keep you informed as to what's happening there. I get the TED news whenever it comes out on my email. So it's the same sort of idea. We'll send that to you weekly. And you can, so some people are, I guess, may respond to me or email me or send me a letter from accessing it in that way. But much of the conversation, I think, is not happening in the comments of, say, Instagram. That's targeted to a different demographic. We didn't talk about demographics, but as the church gets younger, or at least changes generations, all of these platforms are very stratified. So Instagram is for millennials. TikTok is for Gen Z. And, you know, the different Facebook is more for the boomers. So the different generations are on different platforms, and we have to tailor our content to those platforms.
Griselda Rosales from Iceland, welcome Griselda, asked the question, does that give you information about your target audience and real audience, the figures?
Yeah, I guess you're just like answering those questions.
Okay.
Yes,
Yes.
it does. It does. We see some of those demographics playing out. It's also important to me as a division person to see which countries people are coming from. It doesn't matter. It's funny to me. Sometimes the US is actually our top source of traffic for certain platforms. It's great. It boosts our numbers up, but we're not really primarily speaking to those people. I'm much more interested in drilling down to see how many people actually visited our website from Fiji or from Samoa or from Tonga this year. And those numbers are important to me because that's actually our own division, and we're trying to expand into those areas. But yeah, all the social media platforms will give you all of that demographic information if you drill down, and it does help to inform who we're actually talking to and who is more likely to read our content on those platforms, which is something we never had with the print magazine. You just put it out into the church and you have no idea who's reading it or how they're reading it.
I want to invite Paolo to make a comment or a question.
Yes, thank
Yes.
you. I have hello, Jared. How are you? Nice to see you.
Good, thank you. Yes.
I would like to give you, it's not really a question. I would like you to give the opportunity to expand one of the ideas that you brought regarding the news on Adventism. So we know that sometimes there is some kind of, I don't know, maybe restraint of talking about journalism in the church and about what you can bring out as news and what are the boundaries and limits between having your own information going on or doing a real journalism that sometimes is not very positive. You approach that in a very good way, but I would like to give you some opportunity to expand on it. What do you find a limit on which you can be able to write or not, or to publish or not?
Definitely. There is always the competing stakeholders, the challenge between, okay, we're representing the church. So Record is an official division paper. Okay. So my senior consulting editor is the division president. He sees what we do and he contributes a column. He understands things. So that's very helpful. He can stop us from, we don't know, perhaps some controversies or some problems in the church. He can always consult with us and help us to navigate some of those challenges. So there is always the balance between, a real sort of real journalist, or we see in the movies, journalists will chase the public's right to know. They will chase like the story, no matter who it hurts, who it burns down. As a church member, we have to be more empathetic to people and also to the church. And so we have to take that in consideration. We represent the church, we work for the church, and so we're sympathetic to the church. I guess we still have to, if we can use professionalism and write in a style that is journalistic, we are protecting our credibility and we have more authority when we do that. It was my point that I was making. So with the sensitivities and the stakeholders that we have, we balance that with trying to do the best job of letting people know so that they can make good decisions and informed decisions. It is a challenge on some days. I'm not going to lie. There is always that competing pull between telling the story and getting eyeballs and views, because problems are it's like they talk about people that chase ambulances, to see the drama, to see what's the problem here. That goes well. Bad news sells. yet we have an obligation to serve and to build up the church and our members. So we have to balance those things. It is not always easy, but it is an important thing that I think anyone who, there are ethics and standards in place, and yet we hold ourselves to a higher ethic. We're Christian journalists. We're journalists, we're media communicators, we're people, but we're Christians as well. And so we have to hold ourselves to the Jesus ethic, you know, of what is the potential impact of what we do, what we say, how we say it. And so it might be a good story, but it may not make it to print because we have to balance those things. I hope that expands enough and answers some of your question. But it's a good question.
I think every editor in the room feels the pain and the challenges that you feel. It's a tightrope at times that you walk on, and yeah, it's a good discipline. You know, that's the issue. All right, is there's a few more, just one or two more questions about ChatGTP. You obviously brought up that, and Nathaniel's homed in on it. He has a question. Is it the general ChatGTP that you use and others, or is it built independently? I'm not quite sure. I understand that. But I think he also makes a comment, why not use ChatGTP and have more time to serve people directly?
Definitely.
Is this tool a blessing?
I find ChatGTP is a good prompt. It's a good place to start sometimes. I'll be honest, I've only used it very minimally. I was curious to see how it would work. I've used it once or twice. I actually jumped on here before I was preparing this presentation and said, if I was preparing to talk to my European colleagues about news in the South Pacific, what's 5 points that I could start with? ChatGPT does need fact checking. It is inaccurate sometimes. And so it's very important to use it carefully. It's the same with any information. I heard a podcast recently that someone said it's like having an intern, an eager, intelligent, and very productive intern, but you still have to check the work. It's a good starting place. It gives you a place, and it does save time. So if the reason I brought it up was because I understand that some people in Europe are in the country and they're the communication person for that union or that conference, and it's just them by themselves, and they have to put it out because it's the own language as well. You've all got a separate language in each of your different regions. And so if tools like ChatGPT can help you, if tools like using content from other people can fill out your repertoire, you have to take those opportunities. We have to be good stewards of our time and our resources. So ChatGPT, there was actually a presentation. I'm not so sure if you saw the King Charles title page in my presentation. That's an AI generated image. We've had a number of images generated by AI that we don't have the money or the time to pay for the proper image. It's a Bible story where photos don't exist. And so we can make images. And so AI is an important tool that we have to use, but we have to be judicious. Like everything, we have to be careful in our use of that. With the intelligence service about TikTok, I have concerns also about TikTok. I don't use it personally. I don't have an account, but we have a record account, and the people are finding us, I think, because there's Adventist in our name, Adventist Record. And so for a long time, our TikTok was dormant because the person who really started it left. We changed staff, and yet people were following us still, even though we were putting no content up. And so I think it's important to serve those kids. I mean, what's it going to know? That we're a church, that we believe in the second coming, that we keep the Sabbath? Like, if the secret police are coming for us, then, you know, it's going to happen anyway. There's not much we can do about it. So, you know, we're not, yeah, I don't have it on my personal device, I guess, if that's the stealing data that we're talking about, but you can use it on the browser, and other people have it already. They've made that choice. So can we serve them? Can we help them, I think we can. So yeah, that's what we're choosing to do in that space. But I understand the reluctance.
As we regretfully come to an end, 7 o'clock, and recognize this is a big conversation, a massive
Yeah.
conversation
Yes.
about how news through the church channels is delivered. Ivalo is basically giving you credit and record for a progressive agenda of trying to help connect what was once an insular church with the bigger world out there. Remembering record for reporting on news about bigger society environment issues like politics. And I think you follow in the steps of Richard Coffin, and who really drove that big time, and you continued that legacy. And I think from when Paolo and I look down on you from up here, that didn't go out right, did it? When we look
That's all right.
to Australia, we see that you seem to have the security, the intellectual security to deal with those issues, and your constituency feel comfortable with that, and your administration feel comfortable with that, Adventism for the 21st century is a different Adventism from the sectarian Adventism of the late 20th century.
Some of it, not
All
all
right.
of it.
I'll accept that.
Still a challenge. It's still a challenge, and I'm sure you have that in Europe. We have very conservative and very progressive, and we have to be somewhere in between. I would say I grew up in I grew up in Adelaide. It's quieter, it's off the East Coast, so it's more conservative in general. And I would say my family was relatively conservative, but love was always emphasized. So for me, I've been on my own faith progression. So who am I to say that the conservatives are wrong or the progressives are wrong when, my own faith has evolved as I have lived and experienced things. So for me, my role, as I see it as editor, and this is going away from news and just into communicating with my church members in general, I would like to challenge the progressives. I would like to challenge the conservatives. I would like to challenge myself. So when I write an editorial, I'm challenging myself. I'm learning and growing myself. And I'm avoiding language that's going to be a red flag or a dog whistle to a conservative. I'm going to avoid language that's going to stir up the progressives. I'm going to try to find, and it's not a compromise or it's not a middle ground, but it's like I understand that both those groups care passionately for the church. And so I'm going to try and walk that line where I can challenge both of them to come at the idea. If I'm writing on a sensitive social topic that, say, may not always be something that conservatives will agree with, I might use more Ellen White quotes that back me up, or I might use more language that they can understand, couch it in terms that, why is this issue important? Well, it can be a conservative issue. It is a conservative issue. And so you just have to be, as I like the passage that Solomon, I think, gives us with and it's quoted in the New Testament as well, to be as wise as serpents but harmless as doves.
Amen.
We have to be gentle but also discerning.